The Portuguese reader who appreciates epic poetry might look at these verses and probably identify its reasons. A strophe from the Lusíadas of Luís Vaz de Camões. It is actually the strophe 131 of the 10th canto, which briefly mentions Japan. And as you can see there, it's Japan where fire silver is born and will ultimately be illustrated by divine law. The strophe, this particular strophe, wasn't left unnoticed by Portuguese historiography regarding the relationships between Portugal and Japan in the 16th and 17th century, frequently quoting the last two verses to illustrate one of its most recurrent, if not structural, trends, which is the impact of commerce and missionary activities in shaping the relations between Portuguese and the Japanese. So why do we once again incurring the risk of perpetuating a habit and almost rendering it a cliche? The reason I do so is because I believe that these verses have often been read as a reflection of a dynamic Christianization of the islands, but seldom as something more profound that was gradually settling in the minds of Western Europeans in the second half of the 16th century, which was the expectation of a steadfast and thorough Christianization of Japan. The difference is subtle, but merits consideration for, in Catholic eyes, living as they were in an experience of outright rejection of papal authority over Christendom in a religiously fractured Europe. It meant the fulfillment of the Church's design of universal conversion, balancing the scales of division in Europe. So Japan was in this regard equivalent to the missions of the New World, where the presence of barbarian domain favored the notion of a successful evangelization of its inhabitants, at least in the 16th century. The rapid growth of the Japanese mission under the Jesuits favored the circulation of news on Japan and the progress of its Christianizations throughout Europe, either in printed, as we've seen yesterday, or manuscript form. Information on Japan in Europe received a boost in the early 17th century, when other religious orders managed to entertain several missions on the islands, and more so when Portugal government began a hostile policy of banning Christianity, leading to widespread persecution of Japanese Christians and the missionary that supported the later called Católica Cristã or Hidden Christians. Books, reports, letters, martyrologies on the Japanese missions were received and read in Jesuit colleges, Dominican, Augustine, and Franciscan monasteries, reenacting in Japan the beginnings of Christianity itself and spreading the notion of a flourishing persecuted church in need of rescue and deliverance from a tyrant ruler, an effort that young novices were in fact too eager to respond to. We heard yesterday Camilo Russell talk on the Indipeta, the Italian Indipeta. I believe she didn't necessarily need to talk on the case of Japan, but the fact is that Japan recurrently appeared on representation, so this is a significant matter. Also yesterday, Pedro was quoting from Valmian or Pedro Martins, I don't recall exactly. Doesn't Philippine souls also merit to be saved as well as the Japanese? Well, yes, they do, but it's not the same thing. Valentin Carvalho, also mentioned yesterday, called China and Japan as tão insignes missões, missions so notable, suggesting a hierarchy amongst missions. And the fact that so many asked for the mission of Japan confirms that if one was going to devote itself to the salvation of Gentile souls, it might as well be those of one's own choosing. The case I bring your attention to is one such example. And at this point, I'm going to briefly sketch the profile of the Jesuit, which is the cornerstone of my dissertation, and from there proceed to the point of the presentation. Mateo Cebrián was born in Gandia, Valencia, around 1610. He entered the Society of Jesus in 1626 and was ordained priest probably in early 1637, the same year he would embark for Goa. In August 1638, he arrived at Macau, being expelled from there in February 1639, which is to say, the next available monsoon. Left in Bengala by his fellow Jesuit Antonio Cardin, the next decade of his life was of constant wanderings throughout Southeast Asia. From Nagapattinam to Malacca, to Tennessee, to Siam, to Cambodia, to Laos, to Manila, Maluku, and Makassar, where he was finally arrested in the name of the Holy Office and sent to Goa, where he was tried twice, and this after having been expelled 3 times from the Society of Jesus. Oh, and I failed to mention that in the course of this time, Mateo Cebrián claims to have gone to heaven, meeting Christ in all his glory, and through the intercession of Saints Francis Xavier and Ignatius, being brought back to life. So, moving forward to the point of the presentation. How can this rather unusual case allow us to understand how Japan managed to mobilize so many young novices to journey there? And in what terms did missionaries perceive their assistance to persecuted Christianity and martyrdom? The task at hand is not an easy one, since most of his writings disappeared. His Indipete is missing. I found none of the several letters he wrote to the General Vitellevsky, and most information pertaining to his wanderings in Asia is missing in an otherwise fairly complete records of the province of Japan. We have maybe one document written by his own hand and copies of another one spoken in the first person, but in which other hands, or voices if you want to recover the most updated topic of yesterday, I believe are extant. So allow me to begin anew. Mateo Cebrián was actually best known as Mateo Francisco Cebrián. So Cebrián belongs to a very large caste of young Jesuits who took for themselves the name Francisco out of devotion for Francis Xavier. And equivocally, the most famous of Jesuits to do so was Marcello Francesco Mastrilli. Another highly notorious Jesuit associated with the missions of northwestern Mexico was Eusebius Franz Kuhn, or most notably known as Eusebio Francisco Quino, born in Saint-Trent, then belonging to the Holy Roman Empire. Another well-known Jesuit for all of those who study Macau and Japan is Antonio Francisco Cardin, rector of the College of Macau and the local commissioner for the Holy Office. Also, the strikingly unknown figure of Pedro Francisco Jaca, a missionary in the province of Malabar, and of course, Mateo Francisco Cebrián. Cebrián then is one of the many novices of the society living or studying during a period of special prestige for the order, as in less than 20 years, Jesuits across the world saw their founder being beatified in 1609, canonized in 1622, saw Francisco Borja beatified in 1624, the 3 Jesuit brothers crucified in 1597, beatified in 1627, and especially Francis Xavier, beatified and canonized in 1619 and 1622, respectively. So it was also during this time that Christian missions in Japan took a turn for the worse, and a systematic persecution ensued. I believe it to be highly doubtful to be instructed in a college of the Society of Jesus during these years and not to be moved by the accelerating destruction of a vineyard, if you want to employ a 17th century expression, that the society began to tend to. Especially since the destruction was being explained in terms of rivalry due to the jealousy and the irreverence of other religious orders. In these times where the institutional identity of the society is being reinforced, Japanese missions played no lesser part in it. Also, as the persecution went on, that must have instilled a sense of urgency upon those most sensitive to the afflictions of Japanese Christianity. As I mentioned earlier, the task of ascertaining what was Cebrián moved by is rendered difficult either by the mingling of hands in the first-person accounts of his experiences, or by what his detractors or supporters spoke of him. Cebrián claimed, as I've said, to have died and resurrected through the intercession of Francis Xavier, an honor granted to him in order to ensure the awe of the Emperor of Japan and his conversion after which Severin would suffer martyrdom and the conversion of all of Japan would ensue. The narratives of his experience present striking parallels with the more notorious case of Marcel Mastrilli, which Severin met in Barcelona, and who had a tremendous effect on him, to the point that Severin would later allege that even if he was prevented from traveling to Japan, he would cross the seas in the mantle he had from Mastrilli. But what I mean to say, without going too deep into it, I can later elaborate on it if you want to, is that there are similarities between the narratives concerning Mastrilli and Severin that suggest a conversion and a convergence. And this convergence is either the play of an institutional hand or the effective adherence of Severin itself to the society's topoi concerning Saint Francis Xavier or to the narrative of Mastrilli himself. Now, the less that his detractors said of him was that he was a madman, the saint that the society wanted to canonize in life, the redeemer of Japan. I've selected these three comments not randomly, but in order that through the contrast vis-à-vis the image that the society was trying to build around him, Severin, fill the gaps regarding his expectations. So, surely the Aladdin-like sense of Severin had some weight in forging the madman's accusation thrown at him. The same must be said of the warnings he gave when facing adversity in Macau to those who would burn the vessel that would take him to Japan. He stated that their hands would fall off if they ever touched the vessel with the intention of preventing his journey. The least that can be said is that he played the part of someone who had just been granted a mysterious and special favor from God, adding to the mythos of his state of religious exceptionality. But he also did so, showing the lack of restraint of one who desperately wanted to enter Japan. The same lack of restraint that General Vitelleschi warned him shortly after granting him authorization to journey not to Japan as he intended, but to the Malabar missions. I'm sorry for not having translated this letter from General Vitelleschi, but I can translate briefly. What the general is trying to say is that he's thankful for the recovery of the health issues that Severin at some point expressed, but he also warned him that maybe that particular recovery was not could not be interpreted in the way he was doing. But we do not know, since we do not have the letters of Severin, we do not know exactly what he was conveying to the general. What we can imagine is that Severin was probably by now attributing his recovery of health to either Francis Xavier or to divine intervention in general. We can only speculate on his health issues, something that I prefer not to do at this point. But his insistence on going to Japan, a lack of restraint that the general tried to manage, goes beyond resolve. It reveals an unchecked yearning to fulfill that which he had set out to do. And that in itself is a question. To what end does one surrender his life and die a martyr's death? The imitation of Jesus Christ is, of course, an immediate answer, one in which the missionary individually is led to follow the example of Christ in his sacrifice. In Matteo Severin, however, martyrdom coexists with yet another Christological reference, which is his alleged resurrection. The Matteo Francisco Severin that in 1638 is on the brink of achieving the goal of embarking to Japan, most likely envisioned himself as more than a testimony for the faith in the saints of the ancient church martyrs. In the colloquium maintained in St. Francis Xavier, Severin lets us know that he was told that his resurrection mattered to the conversion of Japan. I believe that it is in the redemptive role of Christ that Matteo Severin envisions his own agency in what was left of the Japanese church. We are here at the antipodes of the rationalization of missionary activities during Valinianus times, and this is also not the apostolate of assistance to an afflicted Christianity in the years after the systematic persecution. That his detractors would mock Severin, calling him the Redeemer of Japan, was not, I believe, a fortuitous joke. Facing a rapidly dwindling Christianity that was so dear to the missionary identity of the Society of Jesus, a man like Severin saw in the redemptive sacrifice of Jesus Christ a path for the universal salvation of Japan, and in himself the chosen nation, the chosen agent for salvation with immediate effects. The saint that the Society wished to canonize in life, as I mentioned before, was the expression of the brief institutional support that the province of Japan granted him. It was through the support of Rector and Commissioner for the Holy Office, Antonio Francisco Cardim, and Visitor Manuel Dias, that Severin's Japanese ambition almost came to fruition. It was in Macau that Severin's expectations of the universal conversion of Japan through his redemptive action were integrated on a broader narrative of legitimacy that the Society was undertaking in Macau and Manila regarding the Japanese missions and the apostasy of Cristóvão Ferreira, the former vice-provincial of Japan. That is when the topic of conversion of the emperor by Severin comes into play. The Society too, and especially after Maastricht, was developing its own narrative of universal salvation for Japanese Christians. Narratives on Maastricht teased that an encounter between the Jesuit and the Emperor of Japan would lead to his conversion, and later on that of the entire archipelago. When that failed to happen, that role befell on Severin. This character, the Emperor, should be stressed. There is a parallel to be made with the primitive church in this regard, one that it is explicitly absent from Severin's accounts of miracle, but that is present in other Jesuit printed works. The Emperor was, in the ancient world, the key element in allowing freedom of cult, or the historical element that allowed the freedom of cult for ancient Christianity, and later still enforcing it as the official religion of the empire. In these accounts that the Society is producing since at least 1635, the expectancy of conversion of the Japanese emperor brings with it the hope for what would be called as the restoration of the Japanese church, yet another biblical topic, soon to be co-opted by a rebellious dynastic movement in the Kingdom of Portugal termed the Restauração. So arriving at the end now, since the mid-16th century, Japan is probably the most successful enterprise undertaken by the Jesuits, funneling expectations of a swift and thorough conversion. However, persecution in the first half of the 17th century excited the desires of young missionaries to be agents in the salvation of a flourishing Christianity in order to prevent its extinction. The case of Severin presents us with a fine example in how the destiny of Japanese Christians came to generate an overwhelming anxiety for young priests to be participants and instruments in the universal salvation of that church. In the 1630s, that particular expectation had an almost parousial feel to it, in the sense that pseudo conversion was close, and that accelerating that moment was possible and depended upon one's performative action. We'll never know, of course, of Matteo Severin's state of mind. In this presentation, what I've tried to identify was what his expectations regarding martyrdom were, as well as how his frustrations were the product of an intense reverence for the Japanese mission, or probably more accurate, in the minds of young novices of the Society, a Jesuit group. Thank you.